If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My mother said I wouldn't even reach 200 subscribers, but I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Help me show her that these tales matter.
I worked its support for a mid-sized insurance company back in 2019. Nothing glamorous, just password resets and printer fixes, but the pay was decent, and they let me work weird hours because I was taking classes during the day. Most nights I'd come in around 8 p.m. and leave around 2 or 3 a.m. The building would be completely empty except for security downstairs, and even they'd usually be watching something on their phone at the desk. I liked it that way. No interruptions, no small talk, just me and whatever tickets had piled up. The office was on the 4th floor of this older building downtown. Fluorescent lights, gray cubicles, that industrial carpet that's supposed to hide stains. During the day it was packed with people, but at night it felt like a different place entirely. Sounds carried differently. The AC would kick on and off in this rhythm you could almost set your watch to. I'd been doing this shift for about 4 months when things started feeling off. It began with small things. I'd leave my coffee mug on one desk while I went to fix a computer across the floor, and when I'd come back, it would be moved. Just a few inches, but definitely moved. I figured maybe I was misremembering where I'd put it. Night shifts mess with your head that way. Then there were the chairs. I'd find them pulled out from desks in the morning, even though I always pushed them in before I left. The cleaning crew came on Wednesdays and Fridays, and this was happening on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I asked security if anyone else had access to the 4th floor at night. They said no, just me and them, and they never came up unless there was an issue. One night in November, I was working in the server room at the back of the office. It's this windowless room that's always cold because of all the equipment. I had the door propped open because otherwise you couldn't hear anything going on outside, and I didn't like the idea of someone walking up on me without warning. I was running updates on one of the servers, just watching progress bars when I heard it. Footsteps, not heavy ones but deliberate. The kind of sound dress shoes make on that industrial carpet, soft but rhythmic, coming from somewhere out in the main office space. I stepped out of the server room and looked around. All the lights were on, same as always. I kept them on because the motion sensors were unreliable and I hated walking into darkness. "Hello," I called out. Nothing. The footsteps had stopped. I walked down the main aisle between the cubicles, checking the conference rooms, the break room, even the bathrooms. Empty. Completely empty. I went back to the server room, but I couldn't shake this feeling. Like when you're certain you're alone in your house, but some part of your brain insists you're not. The updates finished around midnight. I started packing up my stuff, ready to call it early, when I noticed something on one of the desks near the window. A coffee mug. My coffee mug. The one I'd left in the server room. I stood there staring at it for probably a full minute. I knew, absolutely knew, I hadn't brought it out there. It was sitting on Jennifer's desk, this HR woman who always had pictures of her kids everywhere. The mug was placed right in the center of her desk calendar, perfectly aligned. I picked it up, it was still warm. I grabbed my backpack and left. Didn't even shut down my computer properly, just pulled my stuff and walked straight to the elevator. In the lobby, I asked the security guard if anyone had come in or out in the last hour. He looked at the log. No one. "You okay, man?" he asked. "You look pale." I told him I was fine, just tired. I kept working that shift for another 2 months because I needed the money. But I never stayed past midnight again, and I never, ever left anything unattended. Some nights I'd still hear those footsteps, always when I was alone in a room, always stopping the moment I went to investigate. The worst part, about a week before I finally switched to day shift, I was leaving around 11 p.m. and I looked back at the office windows from the parking lot. Most of them were dark, but on the 4th floor in the server room where I'd just been, I could see a silhouette, just standing there, watching me leave. I told myself it was a trick of the light. I'm still telling myself that.
Please subscribe to my channel and let's keep breathing life into stories that were never meant to stay silent. Now let's continue.
I worked as a custodian at a regional hospital for about 8 months in 2021. It was night shift, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and the pay was better than anything else I could get at the time. Most people think hospital custodial work is depressing, but honestly, I didn't mind it. You put on your headphones, follow your route, and the time passes. My route included the basement level. This is where they kept medical record storage, old equipment, the morgue, and a bunch of maintenance stuff. It wasn't creepy in the way you'd think, just quiet and functional with that hospital smell of disinfectant and floor wax. The morgue was handled by someone else. I was specifically told not to clean in there, which was fine by me. But I did have to clean the hallway outside it and a few storage rooms nearby. There was this one hallway, probably 50 feet long, with the morgue at one end and a record storage room at the other. My routine was to mop my way from the storage room toward the morgue, then turn around and do the sides. The whole thing took maybe 20 minutes. One night in March, I was mopping that hallway around 2 a.m. I had my headphones in, some podcast I wasn't really paying attention to, when I noticed something at the far end by the morgue. The door was open just slightly, maybe 6 inches. That door was always closed, always. It was one of those heavy doors with a proper seal, the kind that doesn't just drift open. You had to really pull it. I paused my podcast and took out my earbuds. The hallway was dead silent except for the hum of the ventilation system. I looked at that gap in the doorway for a long moment, then went back to mopping. Not my job, not my problem. If someone from the morgue left it open, they'd come back and close it. But the thing is, I'd been the only person in the basement for the last hour. I'd done a full circuit before starting this hallway, and I hadn't seen or heard anyone. I kept mopping, but I couldn't stop glancing at that door, and then I noticed it was opening, slowly. So slowly I thought I might be imagining it, but over the course of maybe 2 minutes, it went from 6 inches to about a foot. No one came out, no sound of movement, just the door slowly swinging open. I stopped mopping. My hands were shaking a little and I was trying to come up with a rational explanation. Air pressure, the ventilation system, something. But I'd worked there for months and that door had never moved on its own before. I thought about calling security, but I felt stupid. What was I going to say? A door opened by itself. They'd think I was wasting their time. So I did what I probably shouldn't have done. I walked toward it. The hallway felt longer than usual. My footsteps echoed even though the floor was wet from mopping. When I got about 10 feet from the door, I stopped. I could see into the morgue now, just a slice of the interior. Stainless steel surfaces. The edge of one of those drawer units they keep bodies in. "Hello," I called out. My voice sounded weak. No response, but I swear I heard something. Not a word, not a voice. Just a sound like someone letting out a long, slow breath. I stepped closer and pushed the door open all the way. The lights were on inside, those bright fluorescent ones that make everything look sterile and washed out. The room was empty. No one at the desk, no one by the drawers, just equipment and silence. I stood there in the doorway looking around. Everything seemed normal, but I had this overwhelming urge to leave. Not walk away, run. Every instinct was screaming at me to get out of that hallway. I pulled the door closed, made sure it latched, and went back to finish mopping. I kept my back to the wall this time so I could watch the door. It stayed closed. I finished my route as quickly as I could and headed upstairs. In the break room, I ran into one of the night nurses, this woman named Sarah who'd always been friendly. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, half joking. I told her about the door. She got quiet for a second, then asked me what time it happened. "Around 2 a.m., I said. She nodded slowly. "That's usually when it happens." When what happens? She looked uncomfortable. The door thing, it's been happening for years. No one knows why. Maintenance has checked it a dozen times. Nothing wrong with it. I asked her if she knew anything else. She hesitated, then said that a few years back, one of the overnight staff quit suddenly after working in the basement. Wouldn't say why, just left and never came back. I worked there for another 5 months. I still had to clean that hallway, but I changed my routine. I do it first thing when I started my shift at 10 p.m. when there were still some people around upstairs, and I never, ever went down there after 1 a.m. The door opened on its own a few more times. I'd see it standing open when I started my shift, and I'd just close it and move on. Once, I found one of my cleaning rags inside the morgue even though I know I left it in the hallway. I didn't go in to get it. I just left it there. On my last night, I was leaving through the basement exit around 6 a.m. The sun was just coming up outside. I looked back down that hallway one final time, and all the lights were off except for the ones right outside the morgue. And in that pool of light, I could see the door, wide open. I didn't go back to close it. I clocked out and left.
Please subscribe, like, and share.
In 2018, I worked overnight stock at a 24-hour grocery store. It was in a decent neighborhood, nothing sketchy, just a regular suburban store. My shift was 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., and for most of that time the store was closed to customers. Just us stockers, one manager, and occasionally a night cleaner. The store was old, built sometime in the 80s, and had this layout where the back storage area connected to the main floor through these swinging double doors. The storage area was huge, with tall metal shelves full of overstock, and it went pretty far back. There were a few lights, but a lot of areas stayed dim because no one bothered replacing the bulbs in sections we didn't use often. I worked there with 2 other guys, Marcus and Dave. We'd usually split up to cover more ground. Marcus did dry goods, Dave did refrigerated, and I handled the back storage and overflow. One night in October, Marcus called in sick and Dave's kid had some emergency, so he left around 1 a.m. The manager said I could handle it or we could close early for restocking. I said I'd handle it. I needed the hours. So it was just me and the manager, Keith, and he spent most of his time in the office doing paperwork. The cleaner had already finished and left. For all practical purposes, I was alone. I was in the back storage area around 2:30 a.m., pulling cases of cereal to bring out front. It was quiet except for the refrigeration units humming and the occasional creak of the building settling. I'd gotten used to those sounds. Then I heard something else. Footsteps. Not the sharp click of dress shoes or the squeak of sneakers. More like a shuffling sound, like someone dragging their feet slightly. I stopped and listened. The footsteps stopped too. Keith, I called out, no answer. I went back to pulling cases. A few seconds later, the footsteps started again. They seemed to be coming from deeper in the storage area, from one of the sections we rarely used. I grabbed my box cutter, not really sure why, and walked toward the sound. The back section was darker, only every third light working. Shelves created these long corridors that you couldn't see down until you were right at the intersection. The footsteps had stopped again. I stood there listening to my own breathing and called out, "Is someone there?" Nothing. Then from somewhere in the darkness ahead, I heard what sounded like boxes shifting. Just a small sound, like someone had bumped into a stack. I should have gone to get Keith. That would have been the smart thing, but I was annoyed more than scared at that point. If someone had broken in or was messing around, I wanted to know. I walked down the corridor, turning on my phone's flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating dust particles in the air and the edges of cardboard boxes. I swept it back and forth across the shelves. That's when I saw them, footprints. The floor back there was dusty, hadn't been cleaned in weeks probably, and there were footprints in the dust. Fresh ones. They led from where I was standing deeper into the storage area toward the very back wall. Here's the thing that made my stomach drop. They were bare footprints. Someone had been walking around back here with no shoes on. I followed them with my light. They went straight back, past shelves of old promotional materials and discontinued items, all the way to the back corner. And there they stopped. Just stopped at the wall like whoever made them had walked straight into it. I stood there staring at those prints for what felt like a full minute. There was no dust disturbed around them, no sign of someone turning around or walking back. They just ended. I backed away slowly, keeping my light pointed at that corner. My heart was hammering. I made it back to the main storage area and went straight to the office. Keith was on his phone, probably playing a game. I told him someone was in the back. He looked annoyed but got up and followed me. I showed him the footprints. He stared at them for a long time, then checked the back door. It was locked from the inside, deadbolt engaged. No other exits from that section. He walked to where the prints ended and examined the wall. Just concrete and metal shelving. Nowhere to go. Must be old prints, he said finally. They're not old, I said. I heard someone walking back here 10 minutes ago. He looked uncomfortable. Look, just finish up front, I'll check the cameras. I went out to the main floor and kept stalking, but I couldn't focus. Every sound made me turn around. I kept expecting to see someone standing at the end of an aisle, watching me. Around 4 a.m., Keith came out and told me to go home early. He looked shaken, which scared me more than anything else that night. Keith was this big, gruff guy who never seemed bothered by anything. I asked him what he saw on the cameras. Nothing, he said, just you, no one else in the store. But the footprints? I don't know, man, just go home. We'll talk about it tomorrow. I left. On the way out, I glanced back at those swinging doors leading to storage. They were moving slightly, like someone had just walked through them, but I could see through the windows. No one was there. I came in the next night for my shift. Keith pulled me aside before I started and said he'd reviewed all the footage from the previous night. According to the cameras, I was the only person in the storage area. The angle didn't show the very back section where I'd found the footprints, but it showed the only path to get there. No one had walked back there except me. You probably saw old footprints and psyched yourself out, he said, but he wouldn't look me in the eye when he said it. I worked there another 3 months. I never went into that back section alone again, and sometimes on quiet nights I'd hear those shuffling footsteps coming from behind those swinging doors. Other people heard it too. No one talked about it directly, but you could tell. The way people would stalk a little faster when they heard it, the way they'd avoid certain aisles. On my last shift, I was cleaning out my locker in the break room when I found something that had fallen behind it. A name tag. Old style from before they switched to the newer ones. It said Richard on it. I asked Keith if he knew who Richard was. His face went pale. Where'd you find that? I told him. He took it from me and threw it in the trash. Don't worry about it, he said. But one of the older employees, this woman named Patricia who'd been there for 15 years, overheard. After Keith left, she told me that Richard used to work overnight stock. About 12 years ago, he'd had a heart attack in the back storage area. They found him the next morning, back in that far corner where the footprints ended. He'd been walking around back there, apparently looking for something when it happened. No shoes. He'd taken them off because his feet hurt from a double shift. I don't know if that's true. Patricia could have been messing with me, but I think about it sometimes. About those footprints just stopping at the wall, about the sound of shuffling feet in the darkness. I think about how maybe some routines are so ingrained that they keep going even after everything else stops.